Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so I have the game. Wesley So versus Fabiano Caruana from the U.S. Championships. Everybody has been asking about this game, and it is finally here. Current U.S. champion Wesley So versus former U.S. champion Fabiano Caruana. Highly anticipated. I didn't see it on YouTube yet, so hopefully I'm the first one so I could get 1 billion views. Anyways, all of my people in the Philippines, I would say mabuhay ka. Kamusta na aking mga kaibigan? Maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking mga video. Hello, Ulit. Magandang hapon. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Almusal tayo. Breakfast time, 6 o'clock in the morning. Bright and early. So hopefully I get to you guys, when you guys are just getting up. So if you guys are ready to go, like I'm ready to go, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. So we got D4, knight to F6, C4, E6. So all standard stuff that we've seen before. We do see knight coming to C3, which is going to be the second best move played. Of course, knight to F3 is going to be the most commonly played move in this position. But we do have knight to C3, and then we have bishop to B4. So we do have the Nimzo Indian defense. A lot of you guys that know openings, are familiar with this opening. So we do see queen up to C2. We got castles by black. So as you can see, black, the whole main reasoning behind making these moves is to try to make it to where you're developing and you are castling as quickly as possible. That should pretty much always be your goal when you're playing an opening. And you see white actually has a touch of a problem with it in this game, but it ends up being okay. We do have A3, and then bishop does take C3, and you pretty much only have 2 different moves that make any sense. Of course, you can legally go king to D1, but that doesn't make any sense at all. So we're not going to do that. We actually see queen takes C3 in the game. Pawn takes C3 has actually been played quite a number of times, and the result is actually pretty good in the database. But like I said, we do see queen takes C3. We got D6, knight comes to F3. We see rook over to E8. We have B4. And then we have the very logical A5. It is going to be the top move in the position. Basically, even though it is kind of off on the side of the board, you cannot allow this type of a pawn presence in the middle of the board to just go unchallenged. So A5 is trying to break down the nice pawns that that white has established. You're also worried a little bit too, because if you develop a knight to C6, let's say something like this, at some point you are going to be looking at probably B5 or even D5 and stuff like that, trading here. And the knight is not going to have a really great place to live. So you definitely want to try to break down that structure before you develop your pieces. So A5 comes, we see bishop over to B2. We got pawn takes B4, pawn takes B4, rook takes A1 with check. Bishop takes A1, and then we do see the novelty of the game, which is B5. And B5 makes a lot of logical sense. Pretty much in this position, any of you guys that watch my stuff, you guys know that when you have a C4, D4, most of the time, you are trying to at least strike some type of blow to that type of a pawn center here. So B5 makes a lot of sense. Also, C5 is possible here as well. Just trying to disrupt the position as much as possible because, these pawns, especially if you can get an E4 in, you're just living a dream case scenario as white. So B5, like I said, was the novelty. We do see pawn takes B5. Knight B comes to D7. We have E3. Knight comes over to B6. We see bishop to D3. And I will mention bishop to D3 in a second. But we do see bishop to B7 for black. We got castles by white. And then bishop takes F3. And then we have pawn takes F3. Now, getting back into the position that we had before, after knight came to B6, it was actually much more preferred to go bishop to E2 because of what you just got done seeing. Bishop taking F3 did do a little bit of damage to your pawn structure, and bishop to E2 just like perfectly prevents any of that because, if we were to just continue developing here, and you had this situation. Of course, if the bishop takes here, you can take back with this bishop. And, you're looking very, very good. That is what's going on with that move. So, like I said, we did see this position here after pawn takes F3. And then immediately black is trying to shift pieces to the king side. So we do see knight f to d5, which not only gets, a tempo on this queen, forcing it to move. Because, of course, like white's trying to set up a checkmate here or something, right? It also frees the queen to start moving. So, I mean, you can see, black is starting to kind of drum up a little bit of a play in this position. So we do see queen sidestepping over to b3, and then immediately we see queen to h4. And, I mean, it could look a little bit scary here for white. I'm not going to lie. This position is actually favorable for black. It's not like black is just, like, completely winning. But if you can start kind of getting these pawns out of the way, I mean, a rook lift is not out of the question. And this is actually something that we're going to be seeing. We do see king coming up to g2. And Wesley So is being fearless. It was actually much more preferred to go king to h1. In the scenario, just kind of sidestepping, anything, maybe possibly getting this rook onto this open file as well. But king comes up to g2. You are trying to keep an eye on this pawn that's doubled. So we do see the e5 that I was talking about. Pawn takes e5, and then we see the rook left of e6. And we actually have reached a point in the game that if you do want to pause the video and guess, white actually has a win in this position. If you want to pause the video and try to spot this win for white, go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So it might be a little bit hard to see, I'm not gonna lie, but what you are trying to do is two different things at once. You are trying to like X-ray through one of your own pieces and attack an under-defended piece, and you're also trying to give your king some move some room to move. One of the major things that you should be paying attention to in this position is the fact that white is down an entire 2 pawns at this point in the game. They only have these 5 pawns. White, even though this pawn is doubled, they do have their 7 pawns right here. So, I mean, white is doing a lot better material-wise. So this move, if you guessed it, then, I mean, you might could have went ahead and won this game. Is actually rook over to d1. And as you can see, like I said, rook to d1 is x-raying through to this knight. All you really have to do is simply discover an attack on this king, and you have just won yourself a knight. But more importantly, you can move this bishop here. So of course you always have the ability to, to sack here and stuff like that, and pretty much get you a piece and a pawn, but you would be giving up the exchange. But you have the ability to just add pressure onto the situation. This bishop coming to e4 would basically be, what's on the menu. So you would probably see pawn takes to e5, and then bishop comes to e4. And as you can see, this pressure on this knight is tremendous. And the problem is you are also x-raying through and possibly throwing a check attempt on to d8 because the knight doesn't really have any good where to go. Of course, if you go knight back to e7, you're looking at mate in 1. So we can't do that. So the only really logical thing is to actually come back to f6 with the knight. This does allow the check, and then you block it with knight to e8, and then the queen sidesteps over to d3. The king can step over to f8, but you do see bishop to c6, and you can see that this pressure on this knight is tremendous. There aren't a lot of good options for you as black. So that is that. After rook to d1, you also had the ability to kind of swing the rook over to h6. But like I said before, in either one of those scenarios, if you start getting checked with the queen, you have the ability to come down to f1 and then swing up to e2. E2 is actually a very, very comfortable square for the king to be on. So, of course, if you see king going down to f1, you see queen to h3 with check. I mean, king coming up to e2. This is just a really, really nice, little like a nook for the king to just kind of hide in. So, if you guessed rook to d1, you would be super gangster. Like I said, you might could have won this game. So going back to what we actually had in the game, we did see rook over to e6, and then Wesley So actually missed this and went pawn takes d6. And as you can see, black is down more pawns. They only have 4 pawns now, and white still has the 7 pawns. So black actually has to do something pretty forcing and drastic. So we see queen going to g5 with check. We see king down to h1, and then we see queen to h5. Trying to target this pawn, and we actually see queen to b2. There really isn't much else to do. The problem with queen to b2 for black is the fact that we are threatening this checkmate here. So Fabiano Caruana really doesn't have much else to do but to just go on a checking spree. So we see queen taking f3 with check, king sidestepping over to g1. And of course, this is really crucial that this bishop is now on d3 or on this diagonal period, because now the rook can't swing over and deliver a mate. So that is very important. We do see queen to g4 with check, king goes over to h1, queen goes to f3, king goes to g1, queen comes back to g4. We see king back to h1, and then we see queen to f3 with check. And this is a draw by threefold repetition. So I go back to this point in the game after rook came down to e6 like this. And I'm just dreaming of rook over to d1 and seeing something like this. Like, how nasty would this have been in the game, man? I think Wesley, he would have jumped up into, I don't know if he'd have jumped up into the lead, but he definitely would have got that much sought after win against Fabiano Caruana. Because as you guys know, he is not number 2 for no reason. Very, very good opponent. So that is that game. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. It was very interesting. I was glad when I came back home right now that is what I saw. Wesley So versus Caruana, because everybody's been waiting on it. So I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. I would say Makito Tayo Mamaya to my people in the Philippines. Paalam. And I will see you guys next time.